sections. So we've previously touched on off-road parts and then bringing cyclists onto the road and how that can look. Now we're focused on, well, what are we going to do at intersections? So we're basically only focused on mid-block connections so far. So we'll have a real good detailed look to what can be installed within this space. Before I do get started within some technical content, I just want to remind that Wally is back on board in today's session. So we will be counting this fellow as he comes up in the slides today, because there will be a quiz at the end of today's slides. Yeah, so make sure you're having a look out for Wally. This one is not included, so you're at a count of 0. I also just wanted to touch on just another example of an on-road bicycle lane treatment. This one is currently being trialled within Victoria, and it has been installed in other jurisdictions in Western Australia, as well as overseas in the States, where it's this idea of a advisory boulevard or advisory bicycle lane, sorry. The way that it works is you've got one traffic lane which is permitted to travel in both directions, and they have to kind of share that space, whereas the bicycle lane is consistently always provided that space, so they don't have to share it at any stage with vehicles. So this is another cross-section of it. The middle lane is shared, so traffic in both directions need to share that lane, that one lane, whereas bicycle traffic, they get one consistent lane each direction. Here's an example of this one installed in Canada. Generally, what you're looking at in these particular environments is you want low speed and low traffic volume. As soon as you start to get higher traffic volumes, you'll have this risk of, motorists wanting to try and overtake other vehicles or hop into the bicycle lane to, avoid oncoming traffic, and it just becomes more and more uncomfortable as a cyclist. So you do want to limit the interaction that vehicles have to enter the bicycle lane, because that is obviously where the conflict is, but they can work in these lower speed, low volume environments. This is just some signage associated with this particular treatment. This is obviously probably not what we would install within our contexts. We wouldn't use the word yield, but we do have similar designs in practice. So this is just a little artistic rendition of how the bicycle boulevard within Victoria works, just to give you a bit more of an idea. So if we're looking at the bottom of the screen, and we can see this motorist, or this vehicle that's traveling in the northern direction, and you can see that they're occupying the entire traffic lane. As soon as they see another vehicle, they're both kind of forced to slow and give way, and also check for any cyclists within the bicycle lane. And where safe to do so, enter the bicycle lane. And then, within this carriageway width, using the bicycle lane, they do have space to be able to pass each other. So there's some different ways of looking at this, in that, well, you now have vehicles entering a bicycle lane, which is obviously not an ideal situation, but I just want to reiterate that these are in spaces with low traffic volume, low speeds. So the ability to be able to see cyclists and to be able to engage in like emergency braking, or, just be able to avoid any collision whatsoever, is increased. So just another thing to consider if you are working within a local street network. Here's what things look like out on the ground there. So this is what's currently being trialled in Victoria. And yeah, just another bit of food for thought within your arsenal as you go to build these type of bicycle infrastructure. Kathy.
Thanks, Max. What sort of traffic volumes are considered appropriate for this treatment?
Yeah, so I would suggest anywhere kind of less than 2,000 vehicles per day, that kind of range, low traffic volumes.
Thank you. And where is this trial at the moment in Victoria?
The name literally just left my head as I started talking about it. I think it's Napier Street but let me follow that up, and I will email the whole group, or I'll put it in the chat in the module 4 so you can see exactly how this project is tracking.
No, you're getting that's correct from Bouchard, so that's all good. The Napier Street, Fitzroy, that's right.
Thank you very much.
We've got some locals. The early photo had cyclists travelling in the opposite direction to the traffic.
Yeah, I think that's just Canada. Yeah, I think that's just the Canada example.
Terrific.
Yeah. Great. All right. For those that reviewed your 360-degree footage from last module, you would have noted that there was an example of riding within a protected bicycle lane, as well as riding hard up against the dooring zone. So hopefully I gave you a bit of perspective as to how those two different treatments feel as a cyclist, and how nerve-wracking it is riding in this environment and you just hoping no one opens their door, particularly when you've got live traffic right against you as well. For those that did review this footage, you may have also noticed that there is a situation where you can kind of see there's a vehicle there that's turning left into this minor street. And there is a little bit of tension there, as because of the sight lines, it's quite difficult for, as you can see, as a cyclist that's riding here, to be able to see that motorist turning left. And that also works the other way, that motorist being able to see that cyclist. So it's another thing to be considering with your protected bicycle lanes. If you are able to open up sight lines by removing parking, for instance, or just one bay, that can be a really effective way for reducing that risk of collision at those minor streets and crossovers. Okay, we can get stuck into the agenda for today. I did want to share something else, just jogged my memory a little bit. So today is all about intersections. For those who have completed the Module 2 assignments, well done. I've marked a lot of them already, and they are certainly showing that the principles of best practice are being communicated. So it's wonderful to see, and I'm getting lots of great recommendations. I did want to mention one particular aspect of this design. So, Kathy, is that design come up on your screen? You can see that?
Yep.
Excellent. So I'm just at the western side of this route at this Wellington Street intersection. And you weren't expected to go into this detail for the assignment. And also for those that have done the assignment, I don't expect you to mention this. So please don't copy this into your answers, because I won't consider that as part of your own work. But something of interest is you'll notice that there's a left turn lane into Wellington Street. There's also a left and through lane for vehicles. Okay? So there's technically two left turning lanes into Wellington Street. The reason I mention that is if I was a cyclist and I wanted to carry on through, right, so I wanted to just continue down York Street, it's likely that the motorist that is on the inside lane or closest to the footpath, likely they'll be able to see me, and they'll understand that they'll understand that they need to give way to me as I carry on through that intersection. But the motorist that is in the outside lane would have restricted sight lines, would be unable to see a cyclist in that position because the vehicle in the inside lane blocks them. So it's sometimes referred to as masking or a dynamic visual obstruction, if you want to become very technical and use the jargon. But this particular design would be considered quite a significant risk for cyclists, how you would manage that conflict at this intersection. Because if you were to build it as is, that is, designed currently, there's quite a significant risk that cyclists would just carry on through and hope that traffic acknowledge that they have right of way. However, there is a confusion as to whether cyclists do actually have right of way if they're wanting to travel through. So not sure if anyone picked that up in their review of the design, but as I said, it wasn't really an expectation for you to, but it just ties in nicely what we're going to be talking about today, which is intersections. So I'll get back into the agenda for today. The thing that we'll be most focused on is protected intersections. These are a relatively new kind of intersection configuration within our jurisdictions. They have been installed for many years in the Netherlands and Denmark and other European nations. They're currently being installed in the United States as well. So we're starting to see, a broader rollout of these type of intersection, and I'll show you exactly how they differ in a second. We'll look at some international examples just to, I suppose, provide that practical aspect to it, as well as the one that's been installed in Melbourne. And then we'll also just talk about general signalized intersections as well, and what we can do to improve their safety performance too. A lot of the resource material from today's session is taken from this appropriately named guidance document, Don't Give Up at the Intersection, which is an American guideline. It's from New York, from memory. So it's a very, very relevant very relevant resource if you are designing within this space. The only thing you need to keep in mind is because it's right-hand side, you just need to flip everything in your head because we obviously drive on the other side of the road. Go to my next slide. All right, protected intersections. So for those that have never seen these before, the first feature that is probably standing out to you is at the corner of each intersection, or just call it the quadrant of each intersection. There's these funny little build-outs, which are called just corner refuge islands, but it is an actual physical curb and channel with infield concrete or something to that effect, but like a physical island that has been deliberately put there. And we'll explain why in a second. So that's kind of the first key takeaway. That is really critical to the design of protected intersections, are these corner refuge islands. The reason that we are implementing these is because traditionally what we would have had is a bicycle lane that would be hard up against our left turn traffic. So it'd be somewhere there. A protected intersection actually builds this offset. So it pushes cyclists further away. You can see that there's an offset in between those traditional design as well as what's currently being proposed in this scenario. So it provides that offset with the sole intention to maximize the sight lines between our left turning traffic and cyclists that are crossing within that space. So I've got plenty of slides coming up if the first iteration of that wasn't too clear. But that is the primary purpose, is we want to maximize our sight lines. So as mentioned, within a conventional intersection, the way that we have typically built our bicycle infrastructure, if you can picture any in your head, you'd have a bicycle lane that just runs right up to the intersection. There may be a head start box or something like that. But more often than not, it's just right up to the intersection, right next to the left turn lane. Sometimes it's in between the left and the through, but most of the time it's curbside, so it's right to the left of the left turn lane. And this means there's actually minimal offset between where that left turn traffic lane is and where the bicycle lane is. A protected intersection creates a wider offset. So it increases the distance between our bicycle lane and our left turn traffic lane. And the reason for this, see this red shaded area here, that is representing the driver's sight lines. In other words, where they can comfortably see, where they're focused on, where their attention is. Within a conventional intersection, our cyclist is not within that field of vision. So it's very difficult for a left-turning vehicle to actually be able to see a cyclist within our conventional intersection designs. If we compare that to our protected intersections, where our field of vision, it's the same magnitude, so it's not as if we're saying that we've got a much wider expanse of line of sight or anything like that. It's more got to do with the offset has brought back vehicles, and cyclists are now crossing much more in front of them. So it's within their, kind of within their windscreen. So it's right in front of them. Makes things much clearer. Here's just another example of, this one is taken from the TMR document, Selection and Design of Cycle Tracks, but a conventional intersection, as you can see, there's the bicycle lane and there's our traffic lane. This one does have a degree of separation, so I wouldn't say that's conventional. That's usually nothing there whatsoever. But a protected intersection, you'll see it provides this offset. That's that offset that I was talking about before. That is achieved through the use of this corner refuge island. You can also see it there in the other quadrant as well. And that is what really provides or maximizes our sight lines between left turn traffic and cyclists crossing at that location.
Max, just a quick question. What happens when a cyclist, is wanting to go straight through at a green light? Do they have to swerve to stay in the cycling lane?
Good question. Yes, let's give Callum a prize there. I like that question.
Okay.
I've got another image later on, which will maybe illustrate that point a little bit better. So I might just shelve that for the moment and wait until I can talk about it to a slide. But I like that question. Thanks, Callum. Here's another example of conventional versus protected. So if you're ever trying to simplify this kind of thinking, is there an offset between our traffic lane and where our bicycle lane is? So a separation that is wider than that. Once again, I wouldn't really call this one a conventional, because conventional wouldn't have any separation at all. This is what has been taken from that document that I mentioned, alluded to at the start. So it is American, so it's not the exact same terminology that we use here, but does provide a pretty good resource to classify different features associated with a protected intersection. So our first number one there is the corner refuge island that I've been talking about. That's essential to provide that offset. If we didn't install that feature, it's incredibly likely that motorists would take a much more sweeping bend across the bicycle lane, which would really, that would then result in higher speeds turning left, and just reduce the effectiveness of this type of treatment. So that's primarily the reason that we install those features. The forward bicycle queuing area. This is, it's also there, number 2. This is installed because we need to acknowledge that these are signalized intersections that we're providing in these examples. And so there's instances where cyclists will have the red light just as general through traffic will have the red light. So we need to provide them with space to be able to store and wait until they have their phase to continue their journey. If not, they can get stuck in, awkward spaces, or they may be forced to enter the footpath if there's nowhere for them to store, or they may just assume that they've got right of way at all times and keep traveling through the intersection. So it's important to have those stop lines there, just to acknowledge that, when the light is red, you are also forced to stop at these locations. Just really articulating where that space is as well. Get rid of that. Number 3, motorist yield line. So that's where motorists are actually turning and crossing over the bicycle path. Different jurisdictions have different line marking to show how that works. You can also see those little triangles. They're sometimes referred to as like shark's teeth. That's just how they denote that within the states. Not something we'd traditionally do within our jurisdictions, but appreciate we're working in a few different environments here. So it's just meant to be like, these are the areas where there's a road user forcing to give way. Number 4, pedestrian crossing island. So this area here and this area here. What's shown within this diagram or this figure is basically we are separating cycling traffic and pedestrian traffic. So we're not having just one shared area where both pedestrians and cyclists cross. And I think that's a very sensible solution, because cyclists that prior to this point have been in a dedicated cycling facility are likely traveling at relatively high speeds. And if you were then forcing them or corralling them into one shared area, it's likely going to be quite uncomfortable for pedestrians, because, you know, they may be forced to weave in and out of pedestrians, or they may be approaching the intersection at high speeds. So the idea of providing both cycling and then a pedestrian facility at these crossing locations is certainly what would be considered best practice. What was up to number 4? Number 5, pedestrian crossing of separated bicycle lanes. So this one's really, really cool. So this is actually installing a little zebra crossing across the bicycle lane. I think I mentioned this in the previous module as well. But really clear way of telling cyclists when pedestrians are crossing over in these kind of directions, they actually have priority across your bicycle lane as well. So cyclists need to slow down. I think it's a lot easier to communicate that to cyclists, because zebra crossings are quite well known and understood, as opposed to trying to say this is a bicycle priority and pedestrians have to give way, because pedestrians are not really used to being told that. So it's much easier to convey the former, where pedestrians have priority. And generally, it's probably going to be a better outcome as well for your road users within the area if cyclists are slowing down, giving way to pedestrians, as opposed to just being allowed to maintain speed and assume that they have priority at all locations. The last one is just pedestrian curb ramp or a pram ramp, which I'm sure we're all quite familiar with as well. Kathy, any questions?
My word, there is some questions.
Good.
Tell us about accommodating large or service vehicle turning movements. Are the islands mountable?
They are indeed, yes. So we do have another slide that we get into that. So we've got a few participants that are reading the future. Yeah.
Good, great. In these protected intersections, could you give cyclists a green light, just like, say, for example, buses, so that they can clear the intersection before the drivers turn left?
Absolutely. I think head starts are a wonderful way to promote people on cyclists as well, because, sorry, people on bicycles, because it's just feels awesome to be able to get in front of traffic and have that head start. I'm not sure you'd be able to fully clear the intersection, just because you may have long lengths of cyclists waiting to get through, which would then have pretty significant impacts on left turning traffic. But I suppose on a site-by-site basis, yeah. Yep. Good thinking. I certainly agree with the head start function of it though. Yep.
Okay. And what about making the pedestrian crossing a raised platform or raised wombat?
Absolutely. Yep. I think that'd be a great solution as well. You have to look at what type of grades that you're going to be implementing there, because you obviously don't want anything that's too sharp that could have a destabilizing effect for cyclists. But but I don't see it as being a reason not to investigate that. I think that's a very sensible solution.
Okay.
Let's give a prize out to that one. That was a very, I mean, they're all excellent questions.
Yeah.
But
Terrific.
I like that last one in particular.
Thanks, Max.
Okay. We'll hop to international example. This one's in the Netherlands. This was a before instance, so before this protected intersection had been installed. And I'll just focus our movement at the top of the screen here. So it's a little bit difficult to see, but you can see there's like a little dotted bicycle lane there. So cyclists would have been riding curbside. So I'll try and draw the path of a cyclist that was heading through, hopefully the pen works, through this intersection like that. So that's the cyclist journey. And if I draw a left turn traffic from that same leg into the major leg, something like that. I was a little bit sweeping on that drawing, but you get the idea that you've got this conflict point here, which isn't perpendicular. So you can certainly assume that. It's an acute angle, meaning it's difficult for motorists in that left turn lane performing that maneuver to be able to sight cyclists who could be on their passenger sides behind them. We can now compare this to how things look within a protected environment. So this is a protected intersection. And I'll do that same little experiment where we've got cyclists. They are now being forced off-road, crossing over, and then go down that path there. So you can see that there's a very wide offset there from where the left turn traffic lane is and where cyclists are crossing. And in the blue, sorry for anyone that's colorblind, but in the other color there, where the left turn traffic is crossing, that angle there, much, much closer to perpendicular. So it's much easier for the vehicle to be able to see cyclists crossing. And that's all been accommodated through that offset that we've been talking about and through that use of the corner refuge. Now, I do have a caveat with the example. I usually always use the Netherlands as best practice, and what they're doing is what we should do everywhere, but I don't actually like this example all that much. A little bit difficult to see in this photo, but the corner refuges that they've installed are actually flush. So the footpath is the same level as that corner refuge island, which is the same level as the general carriageway. So all of it's just one level, which is a little bit confusing. I think if this were to be installed within our jurisdictions, we'd just have vehicles driving all over that. But we don't have quite the same culture that the Netherlands do, where there is an expectation to always see cyclists at every intersection, no matter where you are. So that's probably how they've gotten away with it a little bit more. But you can see, like, all of this is just one flush level. It just, I don't know, just to me it looks a little bit strange, but it's the Netherlands, so you can kind of get away with things like that. Any questions at this point there, Kathy?
No, all good. Thanks, Max.
No worries. I'll keep going then. Got another example here. This one is in Maryland in the United States. And this one is touching on that topic that was questioned before regarding turning movements, particularly of heavy vehicles. And you can see they've got this, where the red corner refuge is, they've nominated one material, which just says proposed brick, whereas they've also got this other shaded material or hatched material, which is saying proposed stamped concrete. And the reason that they've done this is because of that heavy vehicle, long vehicle, turning radius, swept path analysis. So they've worked out, if we were to build out the corner refuges, all of that was raised, would have our heavy vehicles colliding with that feature often, potentially causing destabilization issues. So instead, we're only going to raise up half of it, and the other half can be flush, with the idea that we do want to slow down all motorists that are performing turning maneuvers there, but we also want to allow for, smooth, swept parts for our heavy or our long vehicles. Might be a bit clearer if you see this on the ground. So you can see that concrete section there, that's flush or mountable, as it's referred to as, meaning it's trying to delineate the space, and general traffic will typically take that route that is the edge of the concrete or the mountable apron, whereas heavier vehicles, long vehicles, they can actually go right up to the edge of your physical curb and channel there. Another interesting thing about this particular site in the States is, you may have noticed, on the northern side of this, it's bidirectional. All the other sides are just one direction, so you'd be traveling in a clockwise. But on that side in particular, because of the land use activities on this particular quadrant being particularly interesting, or there's a real demand on either side, it's a bidirectional facility, and that obviously then ties into the bidirectional facility on the Second Avenue side as well. So just another consideration. You can also make protected intersections bidirectional. I've got this last international example, and then we can hop into Melbourne's, but this one might look a little bit more closer to home, or what we would expect within our networks. You can see there's lots and lots of green. So it's very clear where the bicycles are meant to be riding in these examples. Same design philosophy that's been applied within all these sections, though, is, we've got our corner refuge islands here to physically promote, an offset from our left turn traffic lane and where cyclists are crossing. So all of those design considerations are the same. The reason I've included this one is called Cyclops, by the way, Cycle Optimized Protected Signals in Manchester, for those that are interested. The reason I included this one in today's module, I think it's really cool that they have provided this giant bike box, right? Because some of you may be thinking, hang on, aren't we trying to get this offset for cyclists? Why do we have a bike box here? Shouldn't we be encouraging cyclists to do a right turn using our facilities that were provided there? And yes, I would say that is certainly the design intent, and that would improve the level of safety for cyclists if they were to take that journey through there, because you've got, the protected intersection design working as it should, where you've got all those offset provided, and you'll be in a much better position for left-turning motorists to be able to spot you if you're a cyclist. However, cyclists will invariably choose a route that they ascertain to be safe, or what they're comfortable with, or what they're willing to accept as a level of risk. So if you didn't want to do that, you could perch yourself right in the middle of this bike box, and then you could head into the intersection, and if, say, if you wanted to turn right, you could wait there. There's nothing really to say that you can't. There are some road rules in jurisdictions that will say if there is a cycling facility, you have to use it where safe to do so, but I don't know. I think that's a pretty loose. I just think that could be. You could gauge, well, what is safe to me? What does that mean? So you could say this feels safer to me because there's leaves and stuff and debris, and there's too many cyclists and pedestrians in the other road, or whatever it is. So anyway, I digress there, but as a cyclist, you also have this option to use the bike boss, use the right turn lane, and when it's safe to do so, take the movement that general traffic would as well. So I think this is a pretty clever example where it's not just assuming that all cyclists are going to do exactly what is expected of them, which runs back to that question before where I had, if you had the green lights and you were just going straight through, do you have to actually take the meandering path around? Once again, I shouldn't give out any legal advice, but I would expect the road rules, they do stipulate that you're forced to take any bicycle infrastructure that is there. So yes, technically you'd have to use the bicycle lane, but could you reasonably argue that it wasn't safe in that instance to use that? I think you'd be in a pretty good position. So in terms of practice, the actual application of these things, yes, cyclists will use whatever is most convenient to them. And that includes just going straight through and ignoring that offset path. Kathy.
Interesting, Max. Very good. No, we had a question about, yes, why would we have the storage boxes there? But you already went ahead and explained that, and also went through and explained the moving straight through movement. So thank you. That's all the questions for the moment. Do
cool.
keep them coming through. Hold on. There is a bike storage box and shoulder bike lane for straight ahead cyclists.
Bike storage box and shoulder bike lane for straight ahead cyclists. Yep.
Oh, that one there. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're going straight ahead, you just can perch there and then join the bike lane on the other side.
That's right. Yep. So providing for a variety of skill levels of these intersections. This is what it looks like down on the ground. And with a few people cycling. I think this example also might clarify why I'm a fan of providing this as like a zebra crossing. Because even with the yellow there is priority confusion. If a pedestrian steps out in front of that cyclist, is it the cyclist that's meant to give way, or the pedestrian shouldn't have stepped out? Whereas the zebra crossing is much clearer, where the pedestrian has the priority. So that's why I keep talking about that feature as well. So it's obviously not included in this example, but something you can look at, providing. I've done a lot of talking there, Kathy, so I might open up to our first poll of the day and just gauge to hear how our participants are understanding our protected bicycle lane. So the poll for today.
Yeah, that should have popped up on everyone's screen. Great.
The most important feature of a protected intersection is it maximizing sight lines between motor vehicles and cyclists? Is it conflict paint? Is it banning general traffic movements? Or is it separate phasing for general traffic and bicycle traffic? I'll give you a minute to fill that in.
And Max, you thought you were going to take a break, which I see you're doing there via a beverage. But there was a question that we didn't quite get to earlier, which I just wanted to raise. This was way back at the beginning when you were talking about the road, Napier Street, Fitzroy, where you've got the dedicated bike lanes either side, and then the single, so in regards to specifically that Fitzroy example, can you tell us about any community response to that trial that you know of?
So I know that there was significant consultation. So, that is actual like community sessions with residents that will be affected by this, because it's obviously changing the way that they access their local network on a day-to-day basis. So I know there was, multiple sessions where they actually caught up with residents, as well as letter drops and things like that. In terms of now that it has been installed, the evaluation I haven't seen to date. I believe it's still being still within the trial phase, but I'm happy to follow that up
Terrific.
to
Okay.
see if there are any snippets of information we can share.
Thank you, Max. We have 100% of people have answered the question in the poll. So thank you, everybody. And I'll end that and share the results. And the vast majority have gone for maximising sightlines between motor vehicles and cyclists.
Excellent. Great to see. That is the answer that I would have picked as well. That's certainly the focus of these protected intersections. Just trying to make it as easy as possible for vehicles to be able to spot cyclists as they're crossing over. So great to hear that people are on board.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Max. Is the Cyclops preferred over the Melbourne protected example as it appears to increase the offset, or does it increase the risk for pedestrians?
Good question.
Take a moment to digest it.
Yeah. I think that, we're about to hop into the Melbourne one. So maybe I'll go through the Melbourne one and then I'll clarify.
Maybe Len can answer the question for us after that, hey?
Well, then maybe everyone will have their own opinion as to what they would prefer to see on their network. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
And then I don't have to answer it. No, I'm just kidding. I'll just get stuck into the Melbourne one first, and then we can have a chat about a comparison. So this is the Melbourne site along Albert Street. So this connects into the CBD. So it's a common commuter route, something that I say frequently. But this is the existing condition. So this was prior to any intervention. And I'm just going to focus on the bottom right-hand side of this intersection, just to make things easier for me. But you can see there is, it's a little bit difficult to see on the aerial, but it is a separated bicycle lane. So parked traffic, you can see they're pushed further away from the curb and channel, and then there's a separated cycling facility. But just after this red vehicle, it ends, and there's nothing in between this period and this period where there's any cycling infrastructure. There's only a little bicycle box at the intersection. Incredibly common way that cycling infrastructure has been delivered to date. Over the past few decades, it's just been, you can provide a bicycle lane, and then there's that 20 to 50 meter period up to an intersection where there may be nothing. And it's just like a no man's land, or it's just a bit of a good luck trying to get to the intersection, which is why that guidance document is so appropriately named, Don't Give Up at the intersection. We can certainly look to improve things. So this next slide shows you a bit of a half and half how things looked. So you can start to see the protected intersection coming together. But I'll just skip straight to the end, spoilers. So the first thing you may notice is the separation, or that protection, that is carried all the way up to the intersection now. So we don't have that no man's land where there's nothing. So that's already a big tick. Just as before in all our other examples, we do have at each quadrant our corner refuge islands. So providing physical separation between left turning traffic and cyclists, open up those sight lines. So similar design to what we're seeing in other situations. The one that was touched on within that question is within Melbourne, it's a little bit difficult to see kind of within this scope, but when you're actually on the ground or riding it, it's a little bit clearer. But this kind of alignment where you've got this kind of, it's a relatively sharp left and then a relatively sharp right as a cyclist to be able to use that facility, which is a little bit, means you have to manage your speed, I suppose, to get through that or to negotiate that. The Cyclops was much, a bit more sweeping, so a little bit more friendly for cyclist maneuvers, and also had the benefit of that giant bike box. So if you wanted to head straight through, you could use that. For cyclists in Melbourne's case that want to head straight through, I'll try and draw this out. You can, but you have to dodge around these islands like that, which means at this point in time, you're actually entering the live traffic lane. So for that reason, I would say it hasn't really achieved the goal quite as well as the Manchester Cyclops example, because a lot of cyclists would find that left turn, right turn to be offset. They would find that just, they wouldn't do it. They'd find that circuitous and unattractive as a cyclist. So they may be tempted to head straight through the intersection, which, I can say does happen, as I've seen it. I'm still not trying to say that this is a terrible example and we have failed, because we haven't. It's a wonderful example and there's lots of positive benefits with this, but I suppose just some lessons learned along the way and other things you could do just to maximize the benefits associated with this design. So really good question. Hopefully that's given you a bit of perspective, or I suppose my own bias. Just wanted to show you how things looked going through the design phase for this particular intersection. So starting from the left-hand side of the screen, this is how the humble little corner refuge started out, just a tiny little galley beam. And then there was a bit of thought and discussion, well, maybe that doesn't actually protect cyclists enough. So let's try and beef that up and get something more that looks like that second iteration there. And then there was a bit of thought, well, why have we got these kind of tight, it's like a radius and then also a straight tangent. So there's just these awkward angles in there. Let's try and smooth everything out. So now we're at this wonderful like kidney bean kind of a shape. Then there was a little bit of thinking about, well, what if there's lots and lots of cyclists that are stored in this area and they need to, be able to safely prop and wait for the lights to go. So we need to reduce that space a little bit more. And so we got to this boomerang shape. And then finally did some swept path checks and worked out we're going to have to make some sides of this corner refuge mountable just to ensure that heavy vehicles are able to safely turn within that area. So that shaded section is the mountable section. And that just shows how things have progressed from the initial sketch to things being installed. The other pretty cool thing about this particular site is because this was an innovative treatment and lots of people were skeptical, as I'm sure everyone here could relate if you've ever tried to install something new on your networks. To get stakeholders over the line, what they actually did was they built a one-to-one scale. I shouldn't say built, they line marked a one-to-one scale of this exact intersection at an off-road, fully protected location. So it was in a depot. I'll show you what that looked like. And they got it all line marked exactly as it would look were this to be installed in East Melbourne in Albert Street. And then they got all the stakeholders on a bicycle and said, why don't you ride through this and see how you feel? And we'll also have a test vehicle there just to, perform left turn maneuvers and heading straight through and things like that, just to really solidify their experience and gauge the level of risk associated with this design. So pretty clever way of getting people over the line is, why don't you actually experience it before saying no? And it's just another aerial of how this came together. But yeah, just a pretty clever way to manage that risk. Perfect example. So we can see our corner curb refuge island there. We can see a vehicle that's turning left at this location. Pedestrian that's walking across there in a separate facility. Cyclist that's about to enter as well. And the motorist is likely in a position to see both the pedestrian and the cyclist. If not, they'd certainly be traveling at low enough speeds that they would be able to stop if a cyclist were to suddenly appear. So really good thinking by the project team to implement this to get all the stakeholders over the line for this project. Here's how things look out on site. This happened to be a perfect example while I was out there getting this footage, but this taxi driver is turning left as I am cycling through. Oh, that probably might explain what I meant before. If you were riding through and ignoring the offset facility, you kind of have to go around that, which then pushes you in front of the live traffic lane. Yeah, so not ideal, but I can understand. We've also had issues with cyclists just riding straight into the corner refuge as well, not really understanding what this is for and just riding straight into that. A fellow actually rode into it and broke their arm. So yeah, it's just another thing to consider within these designs is how obvious is that for the user within that space. But I digress. So we've got this left turning taxi and I'm heading straight through as a cyclist. The yellow line is my path. Sorry, that would have been a traditional path. And the blue there, or the aqua, can't really see what color that is obviously the journey of the taxi, that left turn. This is a moment forward in time where things might be a little bit clearer. That yellow line would be how traditionally cyclists would cross within this environment. That's the path of the taxi driver. And then this purple line shows how we're achieving that offset and the new path that cyclists are forced to take or are taking through this intersection. And you could see if we were to go straight ahead as a cyclist in this point, you really need to be making a decision like that, in a snap decision. Do I slam on the brakes? Are the driver of that vehicle aware that I am here and heading through? So it creates that real awkward moment in time. And this is exactly when a cyclist would need to make that decision. Whereas with this purple line, we get a little bit more time. And we're in a position that's further away from where the traditional conflict point was, which would have been there. And we've opened up our sight lines. And if you can actually look into the window of the taxi driver, you can see that their body and face is facing towards the crossing point. So it's working exactly as it is intended in this particular example. So great work there by the taxi driver. Okay, got a few more slides on protected intersections and then I'll get stuck into some other signalized intersection designs. A really critical thing is this idea of creating an area where there's just clear sight lines, so approach clear space. The reason for that is if you had parking all the way up to the intersection, a motorist may not be able to sight a cyclist, at these locations. And it also goes both ways, the cyclist being able to see general traffic as well. New Zealand have a very similar diagram, but it works both ways, which I think is perhaps communicates the point a little bit better. But something to really consider, are there any fixed hazards or any, fixed roadside furniture that will impact on sight lines? And what can we do to mitigate that as a risk? Most likely relocation. All right, signalized intersections. And it is that time of day where we ask, what is wrong with this photo? And I'll get rid of that confused cyclist there and I'll move down the banner so you can see a bit clearer. Any idea, or can anyone spot any issues with this particular intersection? Please jot them down in the chat. And I'll check in with Kathy if I've missed anything.
You're all good, Max. Devon's responded that the red brick top also came after the initial iteration on
yes.
the app. Yeah.
I remember they also pasted a whole lot of RIPMs on there as well after the fellow broke his arm going over it. So they tried to improve the conspicuity of those race features.
Very good. So what's wrong with this photo?
Kathy, let's do where in the world is this? Do you know where this one is?
I feel like this is one that one of our staff sent in on one of their overseas jaunts. Is that right?
You're thinking correct.
Don't know. I was about to say America.
Yeah, Canada.
Yep, Canada. Ooh, close enough.
Very close.
Upset all the Canadians. All right. Pit lids. The slotted sewer grate. Pavement surface is all over the shop. It certainly is. Rough and uneven. Wheel traps. No guidance on where to go. Sarah used as directional guidance. Controversial, says Melanie. The grate would be slippery. It looks Canadian. Yeah, another prize for you, Jamin. Forcing riders to cross intersection diagonally, riders not using the lane as a result.
Yes, good thing. Yeah.
Mine says ride to the right of the traffic island.
Yeah, I think that's referring to once you get to the other side, I guess. That's how I read it, but it's a bit odd. I'll be honest, there wasn't one thing wrong with this photo, so all of those items are incredibly relevant. The one in particular that we'll give a prize out for is this diagonal crossing is actually super rare. If anyone knows of an example of this in Australia or New Zealand, I would love a copy of that just via Google Street View, because I'm just super interested in this approach. I'm not necessarily against it, but I'm interested to see how this has been applied, if it has been applied. So not necessarily homework, but if this does look familiar to you, I'd love to see how that looks within your local network. But yeah, bi-directional facility that's crossing diagonally. And as mentioned, we've got a cyclist there just doing whatever they want with no helmet on either. The other thing that wasn't mentioned, but the planter boxes. I'm not sure who's looking after that, but I don't think they're going to get much love there, being in the middle of nowhere. And particularly when things start snowing, I can't picture them surviving too well, but great contributions there. We did talk quickly about the idea of providing head starts at signalised intersections. You will find this info within the Austroads guides. Generally, the most common way to apply it, so there is information exactly when you would apply either A, B, C, or D. So either a head start that's only in that section or across the whole lane itself. It can be used as a wayfinding tool. So for instance, in example B, I have got the bicycle lane, which is going straight, and then the bicycle box or the head start box, which covers both the left turn and the straight, the through there. So as a cyclist, it would communicate to me my journey can continue straight or left. Whereas in example A, perhaps my journey only is to the left. In example D, where it crosses everything, I can turn left, I can go straight, or I can go right. It can also be to do with just predicted volumes of cycling storage within those areas as well, how large you make those storage boxes. The one thing I'll say is this example C is not common, and I'm not really sure where you would install something like that. You'd be much better off just to have one giant bike box than to have a bicycle lane there and then a bicycle lane there. So don't really see the point of example C. But yeah, something to keep in mind. Where we are unable to provide full separation all the way to the intersection, we can look at providing, these type of treatments, which are obviously not as effective as full separation because we do have a conflict point now. One way that it can be managed is through the use of paints, bending out the bicycle lane as they cross over, and then to reach there, it could be a bike box there or just to continue their journey. Another way is through the use of sharrows in the left turn lane. So this indicates that now this is not a traffic lane, it is a shared space. It's not super uncommon to see that approach. Best practice, I would say, in these situations, if it were feasible, if you could install like just a small speed cushion, so as vehicles are turning left to enter the left turn lane, they have to physically slow down. It gives cyclists an improved opportunity to enter that space, and traffic speeds will be lower. So that's another thing that could be considered within this space. I want to show you how I used to ride into work. I've moved house since this location, but this is the road that I used to ride along. And we'll focus on my journey to work, which is right to left of screen. So I used to be in an on-road bicycle facility that's right next to the dooring zone. And as you can see, the bicycle lane kind of ends as it approaches the intersection. But then I do have these little sharrows at the intersection, at the left turn traffic lane, to say that it's a shared space. So, and then I continued straight on my journey through there. To me, not best practice, but as a somewhat confident cyclist, not really the end of the world either. It's very challenging environment and obviously very important for general traffic as well as light rail that we've got on this road too. So that was my journey to work. Not great, but not the end of the world. My journey from work, heading back after a massive slog, 12-hour day, you know how it is, and heading in the bicycle lane along here. And I get to that point and then there's nothing. So this part here, there's no bicycle facilities at all. Very, very uncomfortable as a cyclist, where you suddenly feel alien. You suddenly feel like you are not meant to be there. Just a very bizarre instance where we haven't designed the same facilities on both sides of the intersection. So really important that we've got that consistency. Yeah, I'm happy to share that site if you are interested.
Thanks for that little insight into your 12-hour work days.
Yeah.
I beg to differ. Anyway, on the previous, if you could jump back 2 slides, please. One more. Excellent. There was a question from Jim about this, about who has priority, the left turner of the cyclist where the bike lane flares to the right?
At this point here, who would have priority? Because you're crossing over the bicycle lane, I would suggest that the cyclists have priority.
Yeah. That
would be my interpretation, but I could be wrong.
Okay. Another question, and this has come from Chris, and this one we could talk about at length. I know I do like to talk about it. Did the sharrows in your to work example really make the difference though?
I would, yeah, it's pretty valid. Probably not. I think to me, they do, purely because I talk about sharrows so much in my line of work, and I regularly, like, I know what they mean, I know what they're for, and even when I'm driving a vehicle, I recognize the importance of those features, but acknowledge that general road user behavior and general road users may not know what they are at all, or may not be able to see them. They could be in positions that are just difficult to see, or they could be worn away, or whatever it is. So I certainly don't consider them, this is what we need to be providing to get more people on their bicycles, because that facility is really not appropriate when we think about trying to attract ages 8 to 80. If we're trying to look at cyclists within that realm, I don't think many people would feel comfortable with their 8-year-old child riding in that environment. So no, I don't think that they are a real solution, but in terms of slight improvement, yeah, I do think that there is a degree of betterment.
Terrific. And we've had some further clarification. There are giveaway lines, so the cyclist does have right of way there.
Oh yeah, I'll spot it. The other weird thing, well, I suppose I'm on this, people may be aware, is if a vehicle is, say a vehicle was already here and had a left blinker on and was heading to turn left there. I don't know why my pen is doing that. It's very annoying. So the vehicle is, I'll put them a little bit closer, and they've got their left blinker on and they want to turn left like that. A cyclist can't actually legally overtake them. They're meant to wait behind them. So if you actually see a left turn blinker, you're meant to wait behind them, because it acknowledges that motorists won't be able to see you. The issue I have with that road rule is if you were side by side or slightly behind, you may not be able to see their blinker whatsoever. So it still puts the onus on the cyclist to put themselves in a position of safety, but they may not be able to, physically see that indication that the motorist is turning left. So yeah, one of the road rules that I have a bit of a gripe with there, Kathy.
Fair enough, Max.
Back to signalized intersections. So this one is much more, I suppose, common at interchanges and things like that, but where you've got you'd have a on-road bicycle lane and then a left turn slip lane that merges over quite a distance of the bicycle lane. So this distance in this space here, all of that would be considered a conflict point, which is why all of that has been colored in green. Once again, I wouldn't really see this as a great outcome as if we're just doing paints. That's not really going to eliminate the issue. If it was possible to get cyclists up and off road and away from all this traffic and then crossing it, protected intersection and then carrying on their journeys like that. In our context, all of that sounds pretty far out and sounds pretty unimaginable, but in other contexts, it would seem unimaginable that we have this design and we consider that this is appropriate. Even as motorists, for those that don't cycle often and crossing over a long bicycle lane like that, I'm sure you'd get that uneasiness of, have I really double checked there's no cyclists there? And, it's just uncomfortable. So it is commonly, still installed, and we're basically just happy with installing conflict paint or the green paint to provide that as a solution. But really want to encourage, if you were able to implement a solution such as this one here, that would be a much better outcome. There's also in the slides there an example of that has been installed in Adelaide. Book turns. This is something that we're certainly very fond of in Melbourne for general traffic, but we also do it for cyclists. And it's the idea of, if you wanted to turn right, you first turn left, and then prop and wait at these designated points. And then when this traffic gets the green light to go, you can also go. Really, really sensible solution that is used very, very commonly. Here's just an example of one intersection that I picked within Melbourne, but clearly articulating where cyclists can prop. Other good thing is getting cyclists on that side of the pedestrian crossing rather than forcing them to cross over where pedestrians are to then prop and wait in a black box there. So that's just another design consideration there. Another example of how a signalized intersection could be treated if it was possible to achieve these kind of space requirements. So this is obviously a T intersection, but providing a little bit of a channelized right turn for cyclists. And you could even have a little push button there for cyclists to push, and everyone else would go red and cyclists would be able to cross. This one is an example of it being installed. So yeah, pretty cool example of, so this one's a little bit different because you do kind of cross with pedestrians at this site, but kind of that idea of rather than expecting cyclists to cross over all these traffic lanes to get in a right turn lane, keeping them over on that side of the road and using phasing to help support that journey across. Here's another anecdote while we're on the topic of bicycle signals. Big, complex intersection here in Melbourne that I also ride quite frequently. Access House used to be up here. And you can see there's a lot going on there. There's service roads, general traffic lanes. Of course, there's trams because it's Melbourne. Lots and lots going on. But the actual journey that I was taking was from the bottom of the screen here, and I was turning right up here, crossing all of those traffic lanes. I'll show you how that looks on the ground. So you can see not really a terrific bicycle lane there. There's not a lot of space. Perhaps the smallest bike box you could imagine, or just a tiny little head start there. It's not like it's all the way across. But there were signals, so a bit difficult to see because it's blacked out at the moment, but that is a lantern there which has the bicycle symbol, which gave cyclists the head start to travel into the intersection. So you can see everything once all traffic stops. So trams and all the traffic on the side roads there stopped, or the major road there stopped. That's when the bicycle lantern comes on. And the reason I'm sharing this one as an anecdote is because the bicycle lanterns were installed to encourage this movement, which is traveling north-south or up and down. So that was the design objective. However, as mentioned, I wanted to turn right. So I saw the green light and I started my journey to turn right. The bicycle lanterns usually give you a head start of about 3 to 5 seconds, which wasn't enough time for me to completely clear this intersection. So there was a point in time where I was roughly there and general traffic heading in the north-south direction, they also got the green light. So it put me in a really awkward spot where I had to make a decision. Do I stay right here in the middle of the road, in the middle of the tram lanes, and wait until the next phase? Or do I just push through it and get to the other side? So just something to be mindful of if you are working within bicycle signals. Are you actually designing for signals in one direction, so you're only promoting through movement? And if you were, could that then be supplemented with a directional arrow, just to clarify to cyclists that that's the movement that we are prioritizing within this space? Another kind of sensible innovation within this space is just including the bicycle lanterns within the traffic light face itself. So rather than have two kind of separate poles or facilities or faces. You've just got one, which makes sense. This is in Perth for those that are interested. And you can also see that it's got 3 phases there for, sorry, 3 lanterns for the cycling symbol as well. So they've got the green, the amber, and the red. So similar to, I suppose, how general traffic see it as well, can be applied on both general traffic and the bicycle lane, which is good thinking. That is the close of today's presentation. This final slide is actually that protected intersection that I was showing in Melbourne. That is this being installed at the moment. Wasn't this intersection, but part of that work. So they were building bicycle improvements for this site, but you can see the clear lack of, care for cyclists during the construction of a project that is to benefit cyclists. Because they just closed off the bicycle lane and said, merge right, which is basically take the traffic lane, and there's no other facilities in there to support that. So very contradictory arrangements, and something that I touched on in module 1, but I think is really, really important. Even if you're not actively involved within building or designing cycling networks, it's likely that even in intersections and things like that, projects that you're working on, you will have some interaction with cyclists, and determining if there are to be any temporary traffic management arrangements, how are we to manage our cycling safety and connectivity through the roadworks. So this is probably a really good example where we could have built a little detour for cyclists to get up off-road to access the footpath, and then continue their journey up to the intersection where they can carry on with the facilities that were existing there. But yeah, just a really important consideration if you are working within this space, to have a think about how cycling safety is going to be maintained during the construction of your projects. So the end of today's session, but I did want to touch on the assignments for today. So similar to our previous modules, we do have the 360-degree video footage to review. This example is 2 protected intersections, sorry, 1 protected intersection and 1 regular conventional intersection. Both examples are cyclists performing right turn maneuvers. So once again, it's an opportunity for those that haven't cycled these environments, what it feels like to turn right at a conventional intersection and to push yourself in front of live traffic and head into a right turn lane, versus how comfortable it feels to use the protected intersection and using the offsets all the way around. So really fabulous example there. We've also got the module 3 quiz. So just as before, we do have the pass mark of 80%. If you do have any questions or queries along the way, or anything that you'd like to share with the group, please do let me know. Anything that I may have missed there, Kathy?
I think it's all good. Thank you, Max, and thank you, everyone. I loved the anecdote. Very interesting way to demonstrate some of the things that you're talking about. And yeah, I guess any opportunities for questions, we've got, you've finished a couple of minutes early, which is always good. Well done. But I guess any questions or comments from anyone about any of today's content?
I've got one for you, Kathy. Will it be you on the final module, or will it be Marissa?
I think Marissa will be back with us on Thursday, because remember, I'm doing that bike ride in the morning. So, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. 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 No, Marissa will be back. And as Max mentioned, you've got a couple of quizzes in this series and also a couple of assignments. So please do get those done so that you can get your certificate at the end. So the last session is on Thursday afternoon.
That's right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And we look forward to seeing you in the final module, which is on roundabouts. And wish you all the best, Kathy, with your wonderful bike ride on Thursday. So,
Thank you,
thanks.
Max. And thanks everyone for your participation. Bye.
Bye.